The battlefront was no longer a place for combat, but a gaping maw of hell swallowing everything. Slabs of rock that were once the ground were torn into countless floating chunks, spinning wildly like fragments of a disintegrating planet. Below, glowing red cracks, running like the Earth's exposed blood vessels, spewed heat, ash, and tiny sparks of fire shooting into the air. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and a metallic tang like scorched blood, making every inhalation feel like drawing in hot sand. The Z-Team had been knocked from every foothold. Those who once charged forward fearing neither heaven nor earth were now mere tattered shadows amidst a sea of dust. Some lay motionless from severe injuries, others struggled on through sheer will, but their bodies rebelled, possessing no more key to flare up. A few weak energy sources flickered like dying embers, not a sign of a counterattack but a sign of survival trying to cling to the final thread. Goku was at the edge of a broken rock slope, his hands propped against the debris, his shoulders heavy as if weighed down by the entire sky. The ultimate state he had once reached had abandoned him, leaving behind a hollow and numb body. Every movement now felt like dragging a block of iron. Every attempt to stand brought a stinging pain deep into his bones. His gaze remained fixed on the center of the battlefield, but instead of burning with fire, it was clouded by the weary lucidity of someone who had tried everything. Vegeta stood not far away, his back straight out of proud habit, but his legs trembled slightly like a pillar on the verge of collapsing. Shattered armor plates revealed bruises and deep cuts. He maintained silence, but that silence was no longer an attitude of disdain. It was like an effort to deny what was glaringly obvious. They were on the brink of true defeat. In his sharp, cold eyes, a flicker of tension mixed with helplessness passed through, then was suppressed by the will of his pride. Piccolo leaned against a rock, his green skin turning gray from exhaustion. He tried to control his breathing, drawing each breath like pulling a frayed string. Gohan knelt, his hands trembling with pain, his eyes still trying to watch, as if merely looking could keep everything from collapsing. Android 17 and 18 no longer held their composed posture. One leaned against the rock, eyes alert but body covered in cracks and scorch marks, while the other stood nearby, ready but with nothing left to unleash. Krillin, Yamcha, Tien, and the others had been forced into the role of witnesses, people who could only clench their fists in despair, knowing they could not make a difference. The sky seemed to lower, as if pulled down by someone, not because of clouds, but because of the pressure of the one standing in the center of the battlefield, Jiren. He stood there like a tower of destruction, not needing to move yet still causing the space around him to warp. Dust particles flying near him were crushed, floating fragments of rock vibrated before shattering into powder. The light around him was unstable, as if the colors themselves were being crushed by his weight into dark tones. Viewed from a distance, Jiren resembled a perfect creature of combat, motionless stance, broad shoulders, muscles like rock. But the closer one looked, the more one could see something on that body that did not belong to victory. Along his chest and arms, glowing red cracks appeared like magma fissures beneath his gray skin. Initially, they were as thin as threads, but now they had spread, overlapping like a spiderweb. At some points, they were no longer just streaks of light but opened up into actual cracks, oozing a thick, black liquid, viscous like tar. That black blood fell to the stone ground, smoking and corroding the earth, creating a small but gruesome sizzling sound. Every time Jiren gathered his strength, the cracks flared up like wind being blown into a furnace, then flickered out like a fire starved of oxygen. No one fully understood it, but everyone felt it. Jiren was powerful in an unnatural way, and that unnaturalness was collecting its debt. The moment of the end came like a slow blade. Jiren raised his hand, palm facing the sky, and before it, a dark point appeared. It did not look like an energy ball, but rather like a puncture in reality. Around it, light was bent, the air swirled, and stone dust was sucked in and vanished. Sound within that range was swallowed, leaving behind a terrifying void. The dark point grew larger, heavier, like a nucleus of destruction being compressed. The Z-Team sensed something unmistakable. This was not an attack to threaten, but an attack to erase. Not only erasing people, but erasing the place itself, erasing every way back. Earth seemed to be standing before a door being slammed shut by a sledgehammer. Those still conscious reacted by instinct, Some tried to compress their ki even if only a drop remained. Others tried to stand up even though their knees were about to break. But they were all like wet matchsticks before a storm. The more they struggled, the more their efforts exposed the hopelessness. In that moment, a strange sound intruded, sharp and clear like metal tapping on glass. A communication signal. It rang out of place, like a fire alarm bell amidst a collapsing field. Immediately after, from the distance, a blue streak appeared, tearing through the curtain of ash and dust. A small spaceship rushed in at unimaginable speed, weaving through spinning rock fragments, avoiding pillars of fire and pressure zones, as if the pilot had memorized every flow of the battlefield. The spaceship braked abruptly in midair, creating a gust of wind that whipped the ash and dust away, revealing the ship's hatch opening like a laboratory door in the middle of hell. Bulma stepped out, her white coat fluttering, her eyes focused to the point of coldness. There was no sign of panic, only the tension of someone who had raced against time and bet with their intellect. Bulma's appearance did not bring combat energy, but it brought something else: the power of information. In a war where everyone believed only power could decide, Bulma brought the thing that made even the strongest pause: a truth that could kill from the inside. The spaceship's speaker system was activated, and Bulma's voice echoed across the battlefield, not as a plea, but like a needle stabbing straight into the one holding the power of decision. Her words did not need to be beautiful, nor did they need to be polite. They needed to hit the mark. It forced Jiren's attention away from the destructive attack, at least for a heartbeat. Jiren turned his head. His gaze was cold and heavy, enough to make an ordinary person collapse. But Bulma did not back down. She directed her entire focus toward the only weakness the battlefield had overlooked. Jiren's body was showing signs of decay. Bulma delivered a judgment before the entire battlefield, and she anchored it with clear evidence. The magma cracks on Jiren's chest were spreading and oozing black blood. That was not a wound from a strike, but a symptom. She did not speak with emotion. She spoke as if presenting analysis results before a scientific council. The power core Jiren was using was actually an experimental prototype, leaking energy radiation. It could push power to absurd levels, but the price was incinerating cells, destroying tissue, and causing the body to disintegrate from the inside. The more one forced the power, the more one burned oneself. The moment that truth was thrown out, the thing that changed was not Jiren's face, but the rhythm of the ki fluctuating around him. The dark point of destruction before his palm trembled slightly, like a stable system being disrupted. He looked down at his body, and for the first time on that always motionless face, a strange moment appeared, the realization of an undeniable crack. Black blood still oozed, smoke still rose. Even if he wanted to deny it, his body was speaking for him. Bulma did not stop at exposing the truth. She had come here not to argue, but to change the variables. She pulled from the spaceship a heavy black suitcase, covered in glowing blue security locks. With just a few quick manipulations, the locks popped open, and the suitcase lid opened like opening a mini laboratory in the middle of the battlefield. Pure white light spilled out, not harsh but gentle, like moonlight reflecting on ice. Inside, the suitcase was a sphere of absolute white, the complete Omega Core. Its surface had geometric patterns running in circles, like a structure designed to balance every energy flow, to maintain stability under pressure that a prototype core could not withstand. The white core looked so clean it felt out of place, like a piece of purity brought to confront the decay. The presence of the white core shifted the perception of the entire battlefield. The exhausted warriors could still feel a stable and deep level of energy, completely different from the violent energy leaking from Jiren's body. It was like a silent ocean, not noisy, not ostentatious, but infinite. However, a barrier immediately appeared like a slap in the face. Goku and Vegeta no longer had enough strength to perform the fusion dance. The movements requiring synchronization, strength, and a stable breathing rhythm all were beyond their limits at this moment. The seemingly perfect turnaround plan suddenly faced the risk of premature death due to a physical detail. In the moment Bulma stood amidst the hot wind and ash, the suitcase opening like a challenge to fate, another beam of light appeared above the battlefield. Kaioshin appeared from the void of the spiritual realm, his face tense. He brought with him the Potara earrings, a tool for fast and decisive fusion, requiring no dance, no preparation time. The Potara fell through the air, spinning lightly like 2 drops of jade. In that moment, everything became strangely silent, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Goku and Vegeta caught the earrings in a state of half-consciousness, half-instinct. Vegeta's pride screamed in protest, but a glancing look at Bulma, who had just bet with intellect and recklessness along with the figure of Jiren preparing to erase everything, forced that pride down. This was not the time to win with ego, this was the time to survive. The earrings were put on. A suction force erupted like 2 colliding stars. The surrounding air contracted. Light formed into a pillar of energy swirling straight up into the sky, slicing through the curtain of dust. Floating rock fragments were flung away, the hot wind pushed back. That pillar of light was both violent and perfect, like a chemical reaction occurring at the exact ratio. When the light faded, Vegito appeared in the center of the battlefield. This fusion was not merely a summation of power, it was a new order. Vegito's stance possessed both the composure of one who understood the game and the cold sharpness of one ready to finish it. In that aura, the Z fighters sensed something that had been lost throughout the battle: the initiative. Vegito advanced toward the suitcase as if he already knew it was the final puzzle piece. Bulma, from the spaceship door, held the white core with an energy gripper and transferred it over. The moment the white core reached Vegito's hand, white light reflected onto his skin, making his entire silhouette appear outlined by a soft layer of silver. Instead of using it with the caution of a laboratory, Vegito chose the way of the battlefield, direct, absolute. He crushed the white core. There was no explosion, only a shattering into countless particles of white light, like crushed stardust. Those particles did not scatter, they were sucked straight into Vegito's body, seeping through the skin, flooding into the blood vessels, weaving into every cell. Vegito's entire body emitted a gentle white aura, unlike the explosive aura usually seen, but rather like a stable layer of luminous mist, both soft and sharp. The atmosphere around him changed, ash and dust were pushed away, and nearby magma veins seemed to calm, not because they were extinguished, but because they were suppressed by an order of energy. This was the perfect plot twist moment. While Jiren was powering up with a self-destructing prototype core, Vegito had just absorbed a stable, complete core. The scales did not just tip, they reversed. Jiren reacted immediately. The ki around him flared up blazing red, as if he were burning up whatever remained to crush the one who had just appeared. The magma cracks on his body flared brightly, spreading faster. Black blood oozed out more heavily, smoking like hot tar. He tried to compress the destructive attack once more, forcing the dark point before his hand into a denser, more violent mass, and launched it. The attack rushed forward so fast that the air exploded behind it, but Vegito did not dodge. He met it with a minimalist movement. The white aura layer around him held back the attack like holding back a flood, forcing it to twist and destabilize. The black-red energy collided with the white order, and the result was not an explosion, but disintegration. The destructive attack was ground into fragments and then vanished like ash in the wind. The warriors who were still conscious all felt a shiver run down their spines, not out of fear, but because they had just witnessed something that throughout the battle no one thought possible. Jiren's power could be neutralized cleanly. Vegito stepped forward. With every step placed down, the ground trembled slightly. The rock fragments floating around him no longer spun wildly. They seemed to be re-stabilized, falling down in a lighter trajectory. The energy order of the white core turned the area around him into a zone of stability amidst the chaos. The battle shifted to a new rhythm, the rhythm of a hunt. Jiren rushed in at terrifying speed, his body like a living bullet, but Vegito responded with precision. No need for 100 strikes, just the right point. Vegito's first counterattack struck the chest area where magma cracks were crisscrossed. The heavy sound of collision rang out like suppressed thunder. Jiren's body arched, and black blood spurted out more violently, shooting in streams before falling to the ground, hissing as it corroded the rock. That was not just a strike, it was a test. Vegito was striking at the weakness created by the prototype core, and it was effective. Jiren took a step back, just one step, but it was his first step back. For one who always stood like a statue, that backward step was a crack in his authority. The Z-team saw that like seeing the first ray of light after a long night. Piccolo clenched his fists, his eyes never leaving the battle. Gohan tried to force himself up, pain no longer the only thing in his head. Hope had returned, and hope made one endure pain better. Android 17 narrowed his eyes in analysis, realizing that this time the battle was no longer a hopeless contest of strength. It was a solvable math problem. Bulma, at the spaceship door, no longer had her usual teasing look. She was focused like a scientist, observing a chemical reaction at extreme temperature. Just a small error could cause an explosion. She looked at the white layer of light around Vegito, looked at how it stabilized space, and inside she was both proud and afraid. Proud because her invention was saving the world, afraid because that invention was being absorbed in a way the laboratory had never dared to test. Kaioshin observed from above with his own worry. The Potara fusion and the white core were two massive variables stacked upon each other. If the White Order was stable enough to suppress a destructive attack, it could also create an unpredictable reaction if pushed too far. But no one had the luxury of caution. They only had the luxury of a quick victory. Jiren did not collapse immediately. He was the type of person who did not break easily. He gathered his strength, trying to compensate for the disintegration with sheer will. The red key around him flared up, shaking the very ground. But the more it flared, the more the cracks spread, like a vase having boiling water poured into its fissures. Black blood oozed out more heavily, and each drop seemed to drag with it a portion of burnt vitality. Vegito capitalized on that. He did not rush in frantically. He forced Jiren to increase his own power, to make the prototype core within him overload itself. Every time Jiren tried to get stronger, Vegito blocked him with the White Order, forcing the red-black energy to crash into a stable wall, causing it to recoil back onto Jiren's body like a short-circuiting current. The rhythm of the battle turned into a spiral. The more Jiren struggled, the more he burned himself. The calmer Vegito remained, the more he suppressed his opponent. That was the difference between chaotic power and designed power. While the two standing at the peak confronted each other, the surrounding battlefield continued to collapse. Large slabs of rock fell like meteorites, swept off course by hot winds. Columns of fire spewed up and then extinguished, leaving behind trails of black smoke. A few warriors still capable of moving had to drag themselves away, not to flee, but to avoid being crushed by the environment itself. In a corner, Krillin tried to pull an injured person into a sheltered area, using trembling hands to temporarily bandage the wound. 18 stood guard in front, not flaring large ki, but using small energy pushes to block incoming rubble. Tien tried to erect a barrier, even though it was as thin as paper, but just being thin was enough to save a life for a few seconds. Those small actions did not change the main battle, but they created the feeling that the Z-Team was still a team, not just two people carrying everything, but everyone trying to keep the rest of the world from collapsing. Bulma watched that scene, her heart feeling both a sting and a burn. All those familiar faces, all the times they laughed, argued, and then rushed into danger out of habit now lay within a cruel picture. And if Vegito failed, everything would end. There would be no next time. Vegito accelerated. The layer of white light around him grew thicker, not blinding but dense like thick mist. He closed in on Jiren, and every strike seemed to press exactly where the red-black energy was leaking. No need for showmanship, only efficiency. Jiren was forced to defend in a way he was not accustomed to. For the first time, absolute dominance turned into desperate resistance. Jiren tried to recreate the dark point of destruction, but this time it was no longer stable. It vibrated, distorted, like a heart beating out of rhythm. Red-black energy was pulled in and then repelled out, causing his very arm to tremble. The cracks on his chest flared bright then went dark, like error lights on a device about to burn out. Vegito saw that and pressed further. The White Order gave Jiren no time to settle. It did not allow him to recover. It did not allow him to control. This was a battle of rhythm, and Vegito held the rhythm. In the moment, Jiren tried to pour all his strength into a counterattack. The cracks on his chest widened to the point where every deep red crevice of light was visible. Black blood oozed out in small streams, smoking. His body frozen for a beat, a very short beat, but for those at that level, one beat was enough to decide everything. Vegito seized that beat. The layer of white light around him contracted then burst out like a wave, not destroying the environment but pushing everything away, creating a static void in the center. In that static void, Vegito unleashed a decisive strike, focusing the entire White Order into a single point, like a drill piercing through the final layer of armor. The strike hit exactly where the prototype core within Jiren was reacting. The collision created a sound not like an explosion, but like glass cracking under extreme pressure. The magma cracks on Jiren's body flared bright, then flashed off continuously. Black blood sprayed out violently, but no longer like normal liquid. It shot out like a leaking stream of energy. Jiren still stood, but he stood like a pillar that had been hollowed out from the inside. The Z-Team felt that moment like feeling a phase-shifting earthquake. Piccolo held his breath. Gohan forgot the pain. 17 leaned forward as if ready to rush into support if needed, even knowing he was just like a grain of sand. Bulma unconsciously took a step forward at the spaceship door, as if wanting to pull herself closer to the result. Jiren tried to raise his hand again, trying to hold onto the power of destruction. But the dark point before his palm refused to obey. It vibrated, distorted, then shrank as if strangled by its own instability. The truth Bulma exposed had now become a death sentence. The prototype core was burning him from the inside, and every time he tried to surpass his limits, it demanded his life even more. Vegito stood opposite, the layer of white light still stable. There was no sign of fatigue commensurate with what was happening, as if the white core did not just increase power but also optimized every expenditure. The White Order turned the fused body into a nearly perfect fighting machine. Minimal waste, minimal leakage, minimal error. In the strangely quiet atmosphere before the next collision, a new sensation spread across the battlefield. The feeling that the end no longer belonged to Jiren. It had been stolen by intellect, by a suitcase, by a white core, and by a decision to wear earrings in the final moment. However, the conclusion was not yet sealed, because someone like Jiren does not collapse in a normal way. He could choose to burn up all the rest of himself like a dying star, dragging everything down with him. And that was the most dangerous thing. When someone knows they are about to lose, they can choose to ensure no one wins. Vegito read that through the rhythm of the fluctuations. The layer of white light around him grew thicker, like an invisible armor preparing to withstand a final frantic strike. The Z-Team in the distance felt the pressure increase again, but this time the pressure was no longer a one-way dominance. It was like two equal masses pushing against each other, creating a zone of tension that made space tremble. Bulma stared at Jiren. She did not need dialogue to know what he could do. She had seen out-of-control reactions in the laboratory. When a system is about to break, it can explode. Jiren, with the leaking prototype core, could turn himself into a living explosion. Kaioshin also sensed that and tensed up. Patara was a strong fusion, but if the opponent self-destructed, everything could turn into a disaster. And the white core, though stable, did not guarantee safety against a space-destroying explosion. Vegito took another step, closing the distance, not giving Jiren time to prepare for a destructive suicide. This was the tactic of someone who understood that sometimes the best defense is the fastest finish. The layer of white light around him did not flare out uselessly. It contracted, concentrated, like an invisible blade sharpened by order. In that moment, the battlefield seemed to slow down. Ash and dust hovered, rubble fell slowly. The observers all felt that time was being stretched by the massive level of energy, and in the center, two opposing entities stood facing each other. On one side was leaking power that was burning itself up. On the other was pure power that was stabilizing and suppressing. The episode, if viewed through the narrative rhythm, had gone from despair to hope, not through a muscular rescue, but through an intellectual turnaround. Bulma had turned what was once the villain's absolute advantage into a fatal weakness. And Vegito had turned that invention into combat power in the blink of an eye. The remaining question was not who was stronger, but who would be in time to finish it before the final catastrophe flared up. The energy zone between them compressed like a spring. One more beat, and everything would explode in one of two directions. Either Jiren would collapse completely because of the prototype core self-destructing, or he would drag the entire battlefield into a frenzied explosion. The Z-Team at the edge of the battlefield held their breath. Bulma clenched her hands until they turned white. Kaioshin held his position, ready to intervene with magic if there was a thin opening. Vegito stood still, the layer of white light stable like a statement needing no words. Order had returned, and it was preparing to pass judgment. Ash and dust still hung suspended like a curtain refusing to fall. The battlefront after Vegito's reversal was not quiet at all. On the contrary, it resembled a furnace being compressed to the limit. Space trembled, light distorted at the edges, and rock fragments large and small drifted slowly as if swimming in an invisible liquid. The only difference compared to a few minutes ago was that the sense of initiative had changed hands. The power of decision no longer lay in the hands of the one preparing to erase the Earth, but within the sturdy stance of a fused entity radiating white order. Jiren stood opposite, still towering like a giant block of stone, but inside that block, the sound of cracking had appeared. The magma cracks on his body lit up in an uneven rhythm, like the error indicator lights of an overloaded generator. Black blood oozed out more heavily, no longer just a few drops, but forming thin, smoking streams. His power was still great enough to make the environment cringe, but every time he pushed a little harder, his own body paid the price with an invisible crack, a swallowed pain, a portion of tissue burnt to ash from the inside. Vegito took another step. The white aura around him was as thick as mist, as stable as a wall, and as silent as a verdict. The white core had turned him into a center of balance amidst the chaos. Ash and dust flying near him were pushed aside, and rock fragments falling near him changed trajectory as if controlled by a new law. Without needing to explode, he still made the battlefield yield the way. At the far edge, the Z team dragged themselves into positions where they could observe without being crushed by the aftershocks. Piccolo drew a deep breath, keeping his body from collapsing. Gohan struggled to stand straight so his eyes wouldn't miss the decisive moment. Android 17 looked like he was calculating survival probabilities every second. 18 and Krillin shielded the injured from rubble. Tien tried to erect a thin barrier in an area prone to collapse. None had the strength left to fight, but they remained present as witnesses to the finishing battle that they themselves had contributed a small part to maintaining until the final minute. Bulma stood at the spaceship door, her gaze locked onto Vegito. She had seen the white core operate in a way never tested, and she understood that stability was not free. Every system, no matter how complete, has limits. The only difference was that its limit was pushed so far that ordinary people would think it infinite. But with a prolonged battle, with collisions that shook reality itself, that limit would sooner or later be reached. If it had to end fast, before perfection became overload. Kaioshin floated above, tense as a taut string. The Potara had created Vegito, the white core had raised Vegito to another level, but that very resonance made everything a double-edged sword. The spirit realm could correct some incidents, but it could not turn off a destruction-level explosion if it happened right in the center. And then, the final brutality of the one about to lose appeared. Jiren no longer maintained the combat rhythm of a top-tier warrior. He entered a glitch state in the truest sense, a machine with broken controls, leaving only the function to discharge. The pressure around him spiked then dropped, like a heart in arrhythmia. The magma cracks flared up, dragging along waves of pain that could not be hidden. But instead of retreating, he grasped onto the pain like grasping onto fuel, turning it into madness. Jiren's first strike in that state was no longer a targeted strike. It was a rain of destruction. Black-red energy beams shot out in all directions, plowing through rubble, gouging out space, creating tears like a monster scratches on a glass surface. In some places, the collision was strong enough to leave behind dark holes, like temporary punctures in reality that had not yet healed. The battlefield turned into a chaotic picture, where each line of red-black light could be a death sentence for anyone standing in the wrong place. The Z team was forced to huddle behind the weak barrier. Bulma's spaceship shook from the shockwaves, the stabilization system screeched, the ship's door emitted warning sounds. Bulma still did not leave her position, but her hand gripped the doorframe until it turned white. Amidst that rain of destruction, Vegito did not rush forward. He did not dodge, he walked. Each of his footsteps was like nailing a law into the battlefield. The law that chaos cannot touch the center of order. The red-black energy beams rushed in, touching the ivory-white aura around his body, and instead of exploding, they were bent in direction, curved in rhythm, like floodwaters being guided into a canal. Some beams were compressed thin, then dissolved into light dust like ash. Some beams were elongated, then deformed into soft curves, losing their fangs. Some beams were stopped dead, halting as if frozen in midair, then disintegrating into tiny particles that fell down. That was no longer normal defense. It resembled manipulating reality. The difference lay in the sensation. Jiren's energy was hot, harsh, stabbing the eyes like a blade, while Vegito's white order was gentle, yet sharp in a cold way. It did not hit back, it rewrote. It did not explode, it edited. When a stream of red-black fire rolled in like a storm, Vegito simply stepped through it like stepping through a curtain of rain. The fire touched the zone of white order, suddenly splitting into thin pieces like flower petals, spinning lightly in the air before falling. Against the backdrop of hell, those energy petals sparkled for a second before dissolving, creating a moment absurdly beautiful amidst the destruction. It was a scene that made every observer forget to breathe. Destruction transformed into beauty simply by a calm footstep. The more frenzied Jiren became, the more he pushed himself into the saw blade. The magma cracks on his body spread further, expanding like pried-open wounds. Black blood gushed out, emitting thick smoke. In the chest area, where the prototype core caused the strongest reaction, red-black light flashed continuously like a light bulb about to burn out. His body began to have uncontrolled twitches, a sign of the system disintegrating. But Jiren still did not stop. His corrupted state did not allow stopping, it only allowed discharging until it broke. Vegito continued to advance. The closer he got, the calmer he became. And when the distance was short enough, he did not speed up like a hasty warrior. He upgraded his very presence. The ivory-white aura around him thickened, the light spreading out like a tide. His hair spiked up more, and then a strange transformation occurred. The hair strands did not turn gold or black, but became transparent like crystal, as if light passed through without being tinted. Each hair strand resembled a thin crystal shard, reflecting ash and lava like reflecting a burning world in a glass surface. His outfit also changed accordingly. The familiar martial arts GI seemed to be rewritten by the White Order. Fabric turned into solid energy, lines turned into armor structures. On his body appeared a suit of ancient Roman warrior armor, but not made of metal. It was made of white light, with faint patterns carved as if sculpted from mist. On his shoulders and chest, the armor plates shone softly and stably, as if cast from the white core itself. Behind his back, a floating halo appeared. Unlike the usual divine halo, it resembled a symbol of authority, a seal of order. In that moment, Vegito was no longer a mere fused warrior. He became an icon, a war god of order, standing amidst chaos and forcing it to bow down. At the same time, the feeling on the battlefield shifted completely. Jiren's pressure was still heavy, but it seemed to be distorted by a greater law. Rock fragments floating near Omega Vegito no longer spun wildly. They hovered in a circle, as if arranged. Ash and dust in the area around him fell slowly, like snow falling in a quiet room. And in the center, Omega Vegito looked at Jiren like looking at a fever, something that needed to be cooled down, not feared. Jiren responded with a desperate explosion. The red-black energy around him surged, turning him into a humanoid magma furnace. From his back, a deformation appeared. Energy structures like demon wings sprouted, not because he intentionally shaped them, but because the faulty core was discharging energy in a distorted manner. Those wings were long, sharp, and tattered, like blades of black fire, flapping powerfully to create tears in space. That spectacle was both majestic and grotesque. The strongest one had become a monster of his own desire for power, bearing on his back demon wings born of a system error. Jiren rushed forward, possessing no tactics left, only the instinct to tear. The demon wings swept out, creating red-black cutting lines that clawed through space, leaving tears like scars. Energy beams shot out wildly, adding to the chaos. Everything around was torn apart, not into rubble, but into voids. Omega Vegito still did not dodge. He stepped between the tears, and reality around him healed itself like a wound stitched with light. The red-black cutting lines touching the zone of white order immediately lost their color and heat, transforming into soft ribbons of light like silk, then dissolving into sparkling dust. When Jiren fired a stream of energy as thick as a pillar of fire, Omega Vegito did not block it with a punch or a shield. He manipulated reality. The The red-black pillar of fire was fractured into hundreds of small shards, then each shard curled up, blooming into energy flower petals drifting away. Destruction transformed into slowly falling petals, and in a split second, the battlefield resembled a bizarre garden sprouting upon the foundation of hell. That was a humiliation to Jiren's madness. And the madness screamed even louder. Omega Vegito decided to conclude this spectacle as an ultimate declaration. He raised one hand, and around him appeared 10 Omega swords. They were not drawn from scabbards, nor was there the sound of metal. They were born of white light, long, straight, and thin like the blade of the moon. Each sword hovered at a different angle, pointing its tip at Jiren like 10 destinies. The swords vibrated slightly, as if waiting for a command. Then, in a single rhythm, they shot forward. There was no loud sound of tearing wind. They glided through the air like silent flashes of lightning. They did not slash into the body in the manner of cutting flesh. They slashed into the energy structure. Each stroke was a line of rewriting, a precise line of separation. 6 of Jiren's demon wings were slashed off in a sequence of movements so fast that the naked eye only caught glimpses of white streaks cutting across, before the energy wings fell and dissolved into black dust. Imbalance immediately appeared. Jiren stumbled for a beat, not because losing the wings caused a loss of physical balance, but because he lost the channels to discharge energy. The faulty core inside him was forced to discharge through another path. Through his body, the magma cracks flared violently. Black blood surged out like a stream, smoking more heavily. The pain turned into convulsive jerks. Jiren resembled a capped volcano, pressure accumulating with no escape. The Z team watched that scene with a complex feeling, wanting to finish it, yet realizing that before them was no longer a simple villain, but someone suffering the consequences of his own greed. In that moment, the destruction was no longer beautiful, it was pitiable in a chilling way. Omega Vegito approached slowly, as if not wanting to trigger the suicide explosion. He could sever, could crush, could erase. But the most unexpected choice took shape: to save. Because the faulty core was the thing killing Jiren, not just the opponent's attacks. If the core were pulled out, the madness would cease. If the core were crushed, the disaster would stop. This was not just an execution, this was surgery. Omega Vegito retracted the Omega swords, leaving them hovering behind him like 10 needles being put away. He walked straight into the red-black energy zone, flaring like hellfire. The ivory-white aura around him expanded like a cloak, pushing back the heat. The energy beams shooting out from Jiren touching the white zone immediately turned into scattered falling petals, as if the reality around Omega Vegito had become a court where violence was transformed into harmlessness. Then, Omega Vegito rushed forward, not with a thrust showing off strength, but with a movement as precise and decisive as a surgeon inserting a scalpel. His arm reached straight out, his bare hand piercing through Jiren's chest exactly where the faulty core was causing the strongest reaction. There was no red blood, only smoking black blood pushed out by the White Order. Omega Vegito's hand grasped a scorching red-black object, convulsing like a diseased heart. Just touching it would be enough to incinerate an ordinary person. But Omega Vegito held it like holding a lump of coal within a furnace. Because the White Order around him locked away every leak, he yanked hard. The red-black core was pulled from Jiren's chest, dragging with it a frenzied discharge of energy. The space around them shook, and a tear appeared like the mouth of an abyss. But Omega Vegito did not allow it to grow. The ivory-white aura pressed in, patching it shut, like a hand gagging a monster. The red-black core lay in his hand, convulsing violently. Then he crushed it. The sound was not an explosion, but a low thud, like a heart being crushed within a chest. The red-black light flashed one last time, then snuffed out completely. The shards of black energy dissolved like ash, decomposed by the white aura into harmless particles and dropped onto the battlefield floor like dust. Immediately, Jiren lost his power. The red-black explosion vanished like a fire deprived of oxygen. The magma cracks on his body darkened, no longer glowing. Black blood stopped surging, only trickling lightly like the final trace of a withdrawing toxin. The remaining demon wings vanished. His body shrank back to its normal state, no longer possessing the pressure to crush space. He fell, not falling like a meteorite, but falling like a person exhausted after a fever. His body hit the ground, and dust rose in a small ring. He lay there, his chest heaving heavily, as if he had just escaped a death of his own making. The battlefield fell silent for a long beat. Ash and dust truly fell. Floating rock fragments lost their lifting force and began to fall according to normal gravity. The tears in space healed, and light returned to its familiar straight lines. The Earth, having just stood on the brink of erasure, suddenly regained its right to exist. But the quiet did not last, for the price of perfection began to collect its debt. Omega Vegito stood upright, but the ivory-white aura around him trembled slightly. The energy Roman armor shimmered as if suffering interference. The halo behind his back flickered. His transparent crystal hair vibrated like glass, encountering a loud sound. The white core had done its duty, had stabilized, had rewritten, had saved. And now, after pulling out the red-black core and crushing it, the system reached its overload threshold. White energy began to leak out of Omega Vegito like mist drifting backward. It was not a dangerous leak, but like something being returned to the void. The halo behind his back faded. The energy armor developed cracks of light, not cracks like fracturing, but like dissolving into dust. In the next beat, the fusion began to lose stability. The White Order held Omega Vegito's body like holding a statue in the wind, but the wind had become so strong that the statue could not stand forever. The Potara had fused two souls, the white core had lifted them up, but as the white core dissolved, the stabilizing glue disappeared. Omega Vegito separated. The white light flared up once more like a small pillar, then subsided. When the light dissipated, Goku and Vegeta appeared, each taking a staggering step as if just pulled from a torrent. They were still exhausted, but this was the exhaustion following victory. On their bodies, old wounds remained, but the apocalyptic pressure no longer weighed them down. At the same time, the white core also vanished into the void like a wisp of mist that had completed its mission. No white object remained, no pure light hovering. Only a sense of stability remained, imprinted onto reality like a seal that had been set. In the distance, Toppo and Dispo appeared, rushing toward Jiren. They no longer bore a destructive aura. They carried the panic and worry of teammates watching their leader lying there gasping for breath. They helped Jiren up, propping him against a rock. Jiren was still breathing heavily, his eyes looking down at his own body like someone who had just woken from a long coma and realized the cause of his near death was not the opponent, but himself. The realization was evident in that posture. Greed for power had driven him to use a flawed product, and that flaw had corroded him to the brink of death. Power was no longer something he held. It was something that almost took him away. The Z-Team watched that scene with no remaining desire to crush them. They were tired, they were in pain, they were angry, but they also understood they had just prevented a catastrophe whose root cause was the obsession with power. On the battlefield just past, violence had been conquered by order and the choice to stop at the right time. Toppo and Dispo helped Jiren to his feet. They looked toward the Z-Team, especially toward Goku and Vegeta, the two who had created Vegito and indirectly saved Jiren by extracting the faulty core. In a rare moment, hostility was gone. They bowed their heads, not bowing simply because of defeat, but bowing as an admission. There is a line between execution and salvation, and today that line was chosen in the less cruel direction. Then they flew up, carrying Jiren away from the ash-filled sky. Three silhouettes gradually receded into small dots, disappearing toward outer space, leaving the battlefield to the survivors and the cracks that needed healing. When the tension dissolved, sighs burst out as if people had been holding their breath throughout the entire episode. Piccolo relaxed his shoulders. Gohan knelt down for a second, then gave a tired laugh. Android 17 looked around as if checking to see if reality was truly okay yet. Krillin slumped to the ground, his hands still trembling, but this time it was trembling from escaping death. Bulma turned down the speaker system, but still stood at the spaceship door like someone who had just run a marathon in a firestorm. She looked at Goku and Vegeta, looked at the battlefield just saved, then looked up at the sky where Jiren had disappeared. Her expression was no longer cold. It was a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and a bit of teasing, like the way she protected herself from overwhelming emotions. She winked, the familiar wink of someone who always wanted to turn tragedy into a joke to be able to breathe, like a light punctuation mark after heavy pages. And in that gesture, the entire episode 7 closed with a resonance that was very Bulma. Victory was not only due to muscle, but due to understanding what one was using and daring to bring it at the right time. Against the background of falling ash, the Earth still remained. The Z-Team was alive. The destroyer had been detoxified instead of erased. The white core had dissolved into the void like a god who had finished their duty. And amidst the ruins, what remained was not just victory or defeat, but a reminder: power not fully understood will become a curse, while intellect at the right time can bend even destiny. From Jiren's ambition for control to the rise of the divine Omega Vegito, the battle for the energy core has redefined the true meaning of justice. Jiren failed because he allowed dark power to consume his humanity, while Vegito triumphed through his burning desire to protect all life. As the darkness fades, Jiren departs Earth with a costly lesson. The greatest power is not born from solitude, but from connection. A new era of guardians has begun.